I want to welcome everybody back to the Daily Cheat Sheet, your outlet for what we determine what the news is by reading thousands of things so we could give you a few stories that we have factually checked to the best of our factual abilities. The need for a program like this is the three of us have agreed that the messaging, oftentimes, even from the White House, has been terrible. And it's extremely important to get out news stories that we know are news. With that being said, on our last show, we discussed rumors becoming news. So last night, Israel agreed under immense pressure to lift the blockade and partial blockade and let food into Gaza. This did not go over well with some people in Israel, but that's not the point of the story. This morning, the Washington Post comes out with a story that part of Trump's staff says he's getting tired with Israel if they don't do this or that. Anonymous sources, no names, just that. A rumor, but a rumor that was able to be spread or started because of a story that happened 8 hours before. That is not a coincidence. Go on.
Not only that, they didn't actually have any sources. This is one of those these unverified claims, the vague, no single sources, no documentation, no on the record statements, nothing. Anonymous whispers that amount to just gossip on the schoolyard. And this is why Americans, and I think people worldwide, don't trust legacy media anymore, because stuff like this comes up all the time. And when it does, a little news cycle goes by and then they go, oopsie, our bad, or they don't even say oopsie, our bad, and we find that it wasn't true. This is yet another one of those things. And let's be real. This isn't about Trump. This isn't about Republicans. This isn't about Democrats. But because there is a bias bent, let's be real. If this subject was a rumor about someone on the left, every word would have been triple checked. If someone on the right had published it, they would have been called out. Remember when they were calling everything cheap fakes instead of deep fakes? This was
Yeah.
happening constantly. And now, of course, we're finding out not only all true, Jake Tapper's writing a book about it, right? So this is just yet another one of these situations. And it really matters because when they tell you something's confirmed, you got to ask it yourself. Everybody has to be vigilant. Confirmed by who? Verified by what? If it's just another whisper in the newsroom, then why are we reading it as news? That's what social media is for, where everybody can just speculate idiocy. And the media is supposed to be the place where we go for not just logic and not just thought, but verified information that we can then take and digest. We're not getting that.
Perfectly said. Mend, to his point, is the media nothing more than social media right now, using clickbait, using is that simply what the media is?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the filter that I usually use with everything that I digest is what is the track record? So if you look at Trump's track record from the time he got into office, the things he promised and the things he's been doing, when I see a story that's out of line, I just say that doesn't make sense. That's probably bullshit. And that you could do that across the board. You know, when you looked at the Democrats with the open border policies and them saying that they needed congressional support to da da da, all bullshit. The guy got into office, shut it down. There's no longer an invasion happening on a southern border. So if you look at any of these policies, you just need to look at the party or the person and what their track record has been and where what's currently happening, and you figure out if it's most likely truth or bullshit.
Well said. And Golan, I want to get back to what we were discussing before the show as we were doing our very quick pre-production meeting, and where you were saying, what's the news of the day? And here's the problem. The news of the day, if you're a Republican, has about a 72 to 1 week hour to 1 week cycle. If you're a Democrat, it might have a 2 hour cycle. If it's even reported, that's why people often say fake news isn't just false news, it's news not reported. So to go to the James Comey story, yes, that happened 3 days ago, where apparently God put seashells in front of him that said 8647. I mean, just it was heavenly as it was like that footprints prayer. But it just happened to be for James Comey, 8647. That story was killed by the media. if to use that for reference, Roger Stone, none of us even know what he did, had 17 FBI officers raid his house at 5 a.m. Trump at Mar-a-Lago, 20 FBI officers are allowed to shoot. James Comey, former head of the FBI, calls online on Instagram for the assassination of the president. And the fact that the White House won't constantly bring this up is my point about their messaging to keep this story out there, because it's an important story that the former head of the FBI posted 8647, which for people that are not familiar with the term 86, it means 86th to kill, 47 the president. Go on.
Look, I'll say this. I'll say that I'm going to do the both sides of them a little bit. I know that some people will say 86 is in to get rid of, right? This is one of those things. So perhaps he was saying this other thing that can be, if we're kind about his interpretation, et cetera. The minute he starts to play dumb, okay, and that's the thing. If he had said, you know what, it was uncouth, I used to be in a position of power, for me to even suggest the removal of a president is not appropriate, unprofessional. I apologize, but he didn't. He said, I took some pictures of some seashells I saw on my way home. I didn't realize there was a political message. That's a quote, by the way. I can't imagine that I'm quoting, but I am. So the idea that that happened, now you know that there was malice, right? What's the saying? Better to attribute to stupidity what can be attributed to malice, something like that. Here, I was like, okay, stupid move. And then when he started doing his idiocy denials, right away, I'm like, okay, my bad, malice, complete malice. And the idea that everybody is now papering over it or pretending they didn't know, or suddenly everyone's blind in a room together, means that we're in a cycle once again, just like we were talking about a moment ago, of a news story that we have to either verify, or when it disappears because it doesn't fit the narrative that the mainstream media want us to be listening to, we have to chase. How many times has this happened? By the way, just to point out, when you mentioned Roger Stone, what was he, 70 years old when they raided his house? The FBI showed up, but it wasn't just the FBI. The CNN reporter was right there to film, which means that, I'm just guessing, someone in the FBI had to have let them know, right? So this becomes a thing where you're watching collusion happen between those who want the story leaked and those who want the story perpetuated, in the same way that when a story doesn't fit the narrative, it disappears immediately. I remember, I don't remember the name, so forgive me, but a number of years ago, there was a situation where a Republican, quote unquote Republican, a right wing person drove a car into a group of people. Remember that? It's Comeyville. And when that happened, it was constant. It's still being talked about today. Shortly thereafter, there was someone, an African American guy, who had posted a bunch of anti-white stuff on his social media, drove a car into a group of people. And I was like, whoa, there's a parallel. This one's been in the news for months. It was gone already. And I haven't seen it since. This is the thing that happens, is that if we want it to perpetuate, again, if those in power, let's call it the deep state, whatever you want to call it, those who are pulling the wool over our eyes want it to perpetuate, it sticks around. And when they don't, like a fart in the wind.
Perfectly said. And men, to his point, there's a site called Snopes, and we've all seen it. If it's a Democrat truther rumor or lie, it gets filtered right away. If it's Charlottesville, it takes 7 years for Snopes to actually change it to not a true story. Charlottesville, 7 years, not a true story. And the important thing with Comey is, with this story, why I don't want to let a news story like this die is, remember during the election when Trump said the bloodbath comment about the auto industry, and they took that bloodbath comment and they made it a news story for at least a week. And let's just say they used it through the whole election because it was in ads. And right now, I think a big problem Republicans have is we're not using the same playbook sometimes. And I'll go to you. I had a friend, this is maybe 8 months ago, somebody I consider bright, who still believed that Trump told people to put bleach inside their bodies during COVID. and I had to stay online and send him articles and prove this thing wrong. And I was like, I was his Snopes. So that's why we have to be very vigilant in keeping these things fresh.
Did
The Charlottesville one, sorry, I just want to say the Charlottesville one is insane because there is video that disproves the entire narrative. So the fact that I still today have those conversations is mind-boggling. Sorry, Amanda, I didn't mean to
yeah,
you.
did Snopes finally update the Charlottesville fine people hoax? Did they?
I doubt it.
Yeah,
I doubt it.
Obama, up until the end of the election, Biden, Harris, Obama, they were all still repeating that lie, even though it's been debunked. And there's videos, as Golan says, that Trump said, "I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis who should be utterly
I
condemned."
think they did debunk it. Yes, I think they did.
No, it's about time. For the people that were talking about a threat to our democracy and fear mongering on the left throughout the entire election, to hear them not say a peep when the former head of the FBI is calling for the assassination of the president of the United States. I mean, if that's not an attack on our democracy, I don't know what it is. But these people were just ranting and raving about attack on our democracy is everything but the actual things that are. So it just exposes the hypocrisy of the left.
But it's so important, and I'll keep on saying this within the context of actual news events of today. It we move so quickly that one day of news a month ago seems like a year ago. A year ago seems like 15 years ago. And we have to put things in real perspective, especially with somebody like James Comey. Remember, man, James Comey, when he got fired by Trump, that really set off the whole storm because he leaked to the New York Times, to a friend of his at the New York Times, uh, he leaked the information so they could have a special counsel. People forget that. Those are news
And he
stories.
admitted it. And
And
he
he
admitted it.
and he admitted it. And that's how news stories are meant to be written. They're meant to be sourced from material that we know to be true. So, Mendez, this story with James Comey, this isn't a one-off with him and Trump. This goes back to 2017 when he was fired. And for people that are not familiar with this, there is a supposed, I don't know what you would call it, you'll think of the word in a second, but there's where you don't fire the next FBI guy, where their term is 10 years. And Trump went against the grain and fired Comey and didn't follow procedure, Washington procedure. So we really have to trace where this story comes from. It's not just a one-day thing with Jim Comey.
I'm going to take it a step farther, and I'm going to say that a lot of people in Israel have woken up to this fact, and a lot of people in America have woken up to the fact, and it's time for the Republicans to wake up to this fact. And that is, if you let small lies fester, if you let small things fester, they turn into October 7th. They turn into massive things that will come and bite you in the ass. So when Comey posts, assassinate, 86 is kill, and 47 is the 47th president. When he posts something like that, they need to go after him and prosecute him. If Trump in his first term, he gave Hillary a pass, although he campaigned on lock her up. And then when he got into office, he said it wouldn't be good for the health of the country to actually go after her, and he let it slide. And then they went after him. So the gloves are off. And if he doesn't go after them, if he doesn't go after the Ilhan Omars, who committed immigration fraud, allegedly, for marrying her brother, if they let that slide, if they let these things slide, then it's just going to come and bite them in the ass later down the road. I know some people like to claim that these people are really good lightning rods, but they are brainwashing a lot of our youth, and they believe the stuff that these people are spitting out, tax the rich and all this other nonsense that would destroy this country. The same way that the Israelis, when the Arabs from Egypt living in Gaza and the Arabs from Jordan living in the West Bank of Jordan, which is Judea and Samaria, would tell their kids these little lies that all of it belonged to them. And Israel goes, oh, whatever. Oh, and then they, promulgate this narrative of the Nakba and everything that they've lost. Oh, it's all bullshit. We all know it's bullshit. No. Now you have an entire generation that grew up believing that bullshit, and then they storm across the border and they tear people apart with their bare hands. You cannot let little lies fester. And they
Perfectly said. No, no, no. That was perfectly said. And in essence, that's the point of the show, right? That is the point of the show, is that we're trying to break hideous, insane rumors, little lies that, you're right, 18 years later become the narrative, become the event, we know that in 18 years from now, they'll be talking about Trump saying there's going to be a bloodbath. Okay. We know that in 18 years, the Charlottesville still thing will still exist. We know that there is not a doubt in my mind. But go on to this point. We wake up to news this morning that Joe Biden has stage 4 aggressive prostate cancer, right? So we wake up with this news. We know this to be a fact. He's come out and said it. So everybody right now is going to say, well, it was randomly found, but, and I'm not going to go into the whether they knew, whether they didn't know. The point was, we knew this man was in decline for 4 years, at least 4 years, not because of rumors, but because of what we could see. We saw him speak in public. For years people were telling us not to believe what we saw with our own eyes. And that's a frightening thing when news media tells you don't believe what you're seeing.
I think this is, I mean, something that's endemic at this point. I think to Men's point, this is happening over and over and over again, that we get these little tidbits of information and we don't know if they're true or not. Most of them sound benign. The problem is that each one of those little benign things, when collected together, suddenly become, I hate to use this word because it's such an overused word, but misinformation. And so watching this happen over and over again right now, and by the way, it's tragic that he has cancer. It's terrible. It's always terrible whenever that happens to anybody. And I don't want to be the person that starts to say, wait a minute, you lied to us. When did it get discovered, et cetera? But it's already out there. It's already in the news media. The question's already being asked. And sorry, I think I'm freezing up a little bit here. See, look at it. Even Zoom is trying to stop me from talking about this. Right now, it's out in the news media. The questions of when it happened, when it didn't happen. People are making accusations. Doctors are not refuting those accusations. So that's already becoming part of the kind of the lexicon of what's going on. But Men made a point about what's going on in Gaza and what happened years ago that they allowed to fester. This is something that happens over and over again, but it happens all over the world. One little piece of information becomes, as time goes on, lore, becomes legend, and then eventually becomes fact, right? So when someone says, just to use the example, the bloodbath thing, as you were talking about, in 2012, Joe Biden said, when he was vice president, he said, if the Republicans take control, it'll be a bloodbath for the middle class. Did you know that? Did you remember him saying that?
No.
I know that because it happens to be something I had looked up for the podcast that I had been doing. And I was shocked because, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be shocked at this point, but I was shocked to think, wow, how did this guy saying it'd be a bloodbath for the auto industry become something that still today is misquoted, but this guy saying it has been absolutely memory hold, right? So when you look at what happened in Gaza, the idea that they said, we feel bad. And I was in the army. I said this to my wife years ago. I felt bad for the kids in Gaza because they were being brainwashed with this misinformation. And again, I'm just using these words. It sounds so minute, but this information was literally the Jews eat Palestinian baby meat and they are akin to Satan, et cetera, et cetera. So if that's all you've ever been fed, why would you not want to go across the border and destroy, right? So we knew what was in their textbooks. We knew what UNRWA was teaching to those kids. We knew what information was being given to them through the UN, And we said, better not to get involved, better not. We would occasionally complain about it. We would ask for it to change, but we didn't do anything about it. And little by little, an entire organization, or in this case, an entire country or group of people, whatever you want to call it, they all got radicalized. And they are radicalized in a way that nobody else on earth is radicalized. So this is the same thing that happens in the United States, same thing that happens in Gaza, same thing that happens everywhere at this point. And I don't think that's going to stop unless, and I don't love that it's happening. Being someone who works in the media, I don't love that Trump is suing because of the 60 Minutes interview as a concept, but I feel it's necessary to save the country, because making that decision to sue them and to say, I need you to publicly apologize, give me money. My father told me a long time ago, if it's your friend, an apology, it's enough. If it's a business, money is the apology, right? So him saying that is basically saying it's time to be held accountable for your bullshit. It's time to be held accountable for your lies. In this case, it was a judicious edit. Over here, it's something else. But imagine if this had happened right after Charlottesville. If you repeat that lie, lawsuits are coming. Then
I just want
everybody
to
would have
say,
been scared.
well, extremely well said. And man, to his point, let's take this. So the story came out a couple days ago. They released the audio of Joe Biden with her, and we in the reporting you really hear his demise, and the White House obviously held this back. Remember, Trump's first year, he was forced to take a cognition test. Okay, remember that in his first year, I think first 6 months probably in office, he was faced to take a cognition test. So this is another story. And remember how infuriated people were with the National Enquirer for what they kill, like the kill story, where they would where they would kill the story. The media is responsible for killing almost every real news story that is negative towards the Democrat Party. Almost every news story. And that should really frighten people. If you don't, how many times do we speak and people say, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see that. And we know that Biden and when her was interviewing him, Biden was in a no man's land. He didn't know when his son died. He didn't know what year he was elected. He didn't know when he was vice president. That those three things meant are not a massive story today shows you everything you know. That is a news story today. So if you want to go for a news story today, man, that's a news story.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that if the Republicans don't follow through and hold people accountable for what they've done for the last 4 years. I mean, Biden was demented for a long time. Everybody knew it. In an ultimate act of chutzpah, Jake Tapper, who ran cover for him on video, there were these compilation videos of Jake Tapper shutting people down and saying that Biden had a stutter and how dare you make fun of him and how he's sharp as a tack, all that stuff. Anyone who would even bring it up, Tapper would attack. And now Tapper's wrote the book that's exposing the cover up, supposedly that he wasn't a part of. I mean, he was a key player in that cover up. So it's an ultimate act of chutzpah, but it makes you wonder, if they had the auto signature running in the White House, who was running it? And what did they sign? And is that stuff valid? And are they going to go after them? Like, those are the things we need. We need accountability. We're in a time now where DOJ is doing accountability across all government agencies, which is great. We need the same thing from the DOJ, going after all of these crooks and criminals that have been running that office, and find out what they were doing and who was doing it and who's accountable and who needs to be sent to jail.
Well,
I don't want to always bring this back to Israel, okay? But I want to say one thing about it, which is if you want to understand how controlled, how puppeted Biden was, look at his history when it comes to Israel. Look at even how he reacted in the initial stages after October 7th. The man said, I am a Zionist. The man flew to Israel immediately. I got to give him credit for that. He was someone who was on the side of Israel and was staunchly against what had happened, obviously, but was vocal about it, saying the things that a president should say when it comes to an ally, and certainly an ally who had just been attacked. And slowly but surely, you watched everything change coming out of his, like a puppet, like his face hole. Little by little, it got worse and worse and worse until he was withholding weapons and he was bad mouthing and saying everything, using all the terminology that we know to A, be false, and B, belong to the other side, including terrorist propaganda. That didn't happen because he changed his mind slowly over the course of the skirmish. That happened because he no longer had his faculties with him and someone else was controlling things from the inside. I have an entire episode on my podcast called The Democrats' Jew Problem. And in that, I start going through lists of names within the Democratic Party of people who were anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, that were whispering in his ear, including people who used to work for SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, used to work for UNRWA, like obvious blatant stuff. And you got to watch this guy who, didn't even know who George Clooney was when he was standing in front of him until he was told, wait for other people to tell him what to say, and then said it. And when he went spontaneous, he said Mexico is helping him get help into Gaza. It's not an accident.
You both raise really great points, and that's why it's nearly impossible to just. It really, you have to take the stories and break them down and break them apart, and it's important for people to really. It's important for me. So it was important for me this morning when I saw that story about the Washington Post reporting about there being from the Trump White House to say, I'm not going to listen to my rumors from last week. Today I'm going to wait and see what actually happens. And I am not upset about the story. I mean, but it goes to the bigger question, Mend, and it goes to this. Just want to give you an example. About 20 years ago, I had written an article, and it did well. And then I wrote another article, and I sent it to Ben Stein, and he said, "This is a great article. You have no business writing this." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you're not an economist. You don't know anything really much about the economy. Who are you to write this?" And I got really upset, but it made me understand that he was 100% correct. Correct. I had no business because I had read a few things to write anything about which way the economy or anything like that was heading. And it taught me a lesson to read, and to be knowledgeable. And it goes back to what we were referring to last week, man. What is an expert? How this is the times we are in right now where we really have to try sourcing our sources, and it's such a hard job to do. Men, you run an SEO company. If somebody you want to hire somebody, you're going to want to see their resume, right? Resumes are no longer needed, men.
Well, I think there's two things that make an expert. One is track record, and the other one is, wisdom. Wisdom comes with experience. So, if you look at Thomas Friedman or any of these Paul Krugman, these guys that are so-called experts, their track record tells you who they are. They've gotten it wrong so many times that they might be an expert at the New York Times, but just look at their track record. And then there are other people out there that Sebastian Gorka, I'm butchering his last.
You said it right.
Right.
Excellent. You listen to the man, he's just nailing it. He's got the facts down, and it makes so much sense. You listen to people, and I love doing this when I get into arguments with either the people with Trump derangement syndrome or the vehement anti-Israel crowd. And you ask them for specifics where they can't go to Google to go check with their puppet masters and ask them, well, how do I answer this one? Like, you think about it. I want you to answer. You tell me what you think about it. And they can't, because it's cult mentality. So they run back and they say, hey, guys, what do we think about this? It's just, they're not thinking for themselves. They're a bunch of sheep, and they're running off of emotion. It's all emotion driven, which is why, you have a lot of people turning against the Israel and the Gaza war, because they're seeing these pictures come out of Gaza, which are horrendous. but they've never seen the pictures that came out of Israel on October 8th, that shows you how this started. And you know, the quick answer that I have for those people is Hamas surrender, release the hostages, and it's over. Period. That's the only thing you should be calling for right now. You want this to end, that's how it ends. You can't keep the rapists and the killers in charge and power and our hostages still there and say, oh, this should end. Israel's so bad. Fuck off.
And by the way, the reason we have to keep on talking about this is because this is in the daily news. This
Yep.
is a news story every day. And I had posted something last night, go on it. It's very interesting how there are 49 other war conflicts going on in the world right now. Yet Israel seems to always be the one conflict that everybody shines the light on. Not Darfur, not everything else. It's sort of an amazing thing. I'll give you an example. Remember pre-Trump 2016? Remember everything that was in the news. You had the Kardashians, Scientology, NGOs, MGOs, food stuff, everything we didn't understand what was going on. Trump gets elected, none of it mattered anymore. None of it mattered anymore. You had where the children were kidnapped. Please, in Africa, and
Bring our
say the
girls
name.
home. Yeah.
Bring
Well,
that whole bring our girls home. All of a sudden Israel's in a fight the next day. Girls are forgotten. Israel's the main story. I'll go on. That it's and I wrote it's the word selection, a word us Jews hate.
Yeah.
But there is a certain selexia that goes on with so when we're talking about this, it's not just because we're Jews, but it's in the news at the same time. Go on.
And the funny thing is that people who maybe don't know a lot about the topic, and that's fair enough. I don't mind when people are ignorant and are prepared to admit it. Okay. One of the things that for many years my wife used to say is, whatever topic was, if I would get into it, I'm a very political animal. I would start talking. She would go, I just don't know enough to speak about this intelligently. And I'd say, great, let's discuss it. The problem is today, people don't know enough to speak about it and they don't shut the fuck up anyway. That's the problem, right? And the reason why it's really interesting is because who does that benefit? Well, making sure that this remains in the news, that cycle constantly going, only benefits Hamas and the terrorists. Because if you are a group of people who not only don't mind sacrificing your own kids for a war effort, but have said out loud on video a dozen times that I can find online, and I'm sure many more times offline, we have this many kids so we can martyr them for the cause of destroying Israel. They're very clear about this. So if you are that person, well, there's a reason why today, once again, Hamas said no thank you to a peace treaty. A good peace treaty. Okay, it's the 700th time they've been offered a peace treaty. They've turned it down. Why? Because they want this to continue. They want their people to be pushed out of certain areas, even though that means Israel is literally saving lives because it looks bad on camera. They want people to be staying in place, and there's recorded phone calls of people being told to leave areas and then them saying, God, or the Hamas told me to stay. There's video of Hamas blocking roads to make sure people can't leave areas they know are going to be bombed. Why? They want those pictures and videos after the fact of all the dead kids, if there are, in fact, dead kids. We've discovered, of course, that 70% of the women and children that were killed in Gaza were actually fighting age men and combatants. But okay, let's just, even if that wasn't the case, if I keep throwing babies into a spray of gunfire and then go, I can't believe you shot the baby, whose fault is that? So the idea of perpetuating this news cycle over and over and over again is deliberate. And the people who are doing it on the media side know that as well as we do, which means that they have a narrative, again, that they are trying to perpetuate. So when the terrorists benefit from it and they keep doing it, as far as I'm concerned, that means they're in league with the terrorists. That means they are just another arm of the same unit. And that's a problem because that's where we're supposed to get our information.
No,
To add on
man,
top,
and I just want to say that it's extremely well said, and it's not just the left media. Okay, we don't just rail against the left media. We rail against the right media too, man. So before you, I just wanted to say this, man. So when you watch people like Tucker Carlson or any of or Bannon or any of those things, where they constantly are saying the whole thing with Iran is to drag the United States into war. That again, that's more code for nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles basically mean Jews. Okay, we don't want the Jews to drag us in to a war with Iran because there's nothing that could make sense of why we should not be extremely weary of Iran having nuclear weapons. And for people that are not familiar with uh, intercontinental ballistic missiles, they travel up to 3,000 to 5,000 miles. Just so people understand that, and they have a nuclear warhead attached to them. Just so people understand what exactly those are. Man,
Yeah, I mean, the isolationists or whatever you want to call them, they all of them have come to this realization very recently. It coincides with a lot of Qatar money being spread out amongst a lot of the podcasting crew, as well as university, everyone else. But if you think that allowing Iran to get a nuclear weapon when they're the #1 state sponsor of terrorism throughout the Middle East, the Iranians want to dominate. They want Shia Islam to dominate the Middle East. They want to get rid of the Sunnis. That's why the Sunnis and the Shias fight and have been fighting forever. And then you have the other dynamic of the Turks, which is the Ottomans, and they're trying to gain control. So there's a whole giant soup in the Middle East of people that really don't get along with each other. Everybody's out for their own, and they help each other against their biggest enemy at the time, which used to be the rallying cry was Israel, because they're not even Muslim. They should be #1 on the list. Once they were done with the Israelis, they figured that they can move on to the Kurds and the Alawites and the Druze and any other minority. Look at the Hazaras in Iraq; they're decimated. The Yazidis. I love this analogy. The Yazidis are like the Jews in Israel without guns. You know, that's what would have happened. They would have been put into cages and burned alive, all of them. And back to what Golan said earlier about the proof that the Palestinians use their children as human shields and they want the death toll to go up. You don't even need to watch the videos of them saying it. You don't need to watch the videos of them doing it. The fact that they built the tunnels under their homes and they hid their fighters in the tunnels while they left the people above ground, they did not let them into the tunnels to be bombed to shit. That tells you everything you need to know. And even with that stat, we know that the combatant to civilian death ratio in the Israel-Gaza war is one of the lowest in modern warfare. Therefore, you can't count the number of bombs dropped, because you could drop 100 bombs in the middle of nowhere and it kills nobody, and that's nothing. But you can't say indiscriminate bombing if the death ratios are skewed the way they are in the Israel-Gaza war. It's not indiscriminate bombing. It is not trying to kill civilians. If they were trying to kill civilians, there'd be a lot more dead. They dropped so many bombs and killed so few civilians compared to the number of bombs they've dropped. That's a testament to the the precision and the care that Israel takes to try to mitigate civilian deaths, because they know that Hamas wants the civilians to die because it helps their cause. So it's not even in Israel's best interest to kill civilians. They're trying not to because they don't want to feed the enemy that ammo that they're going to use on social media.
By the way, I'll add that even if the numbers were astronomical of quote unquote civilian deaths, there's a handful of reasons why you can be skeptical. Number one, they don't follow the rules of war. They don't wear uniforms. You don't know who's a civilian and who's not a civilian. Okay, there was a situation years ago where Israel decided to let women who were pregnant come through borders at a time when it was very dangerous. And they let one in, and one of them had a bomb strapped to her. And she was deliberately doing this. It wasn't that she was forced to do it. And then she killed her. And then they stopped letting pregnant women come through to go to hospitals. And people, of course, leave out the first part and just say Israel stopped letting pregnant women through the checkpoints, right? In the same way, nobody talked about Ben Gurion Airport being bombed. They just went, can you believe Israel just bombed an airport in Yemen? Whoa, what a group of assholes. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is you're talking about a group that has said over and over and over again, publicly and privately, and on video and not on video. We love death more than you love life. And you have recorded phone calls of fathers with children saying, not going to leave. We know you're bombing this place in X number of minutes, and we're not going to leave deliberately. We know you're doing it. We want to be martyrs. That's kind of the whole mentality. It's remember that whole thing about 72 virgins waiting for you? That's this group. They're excited. This life doesn't matter. Okay, they interviewed a mother whose son was being operated on in an Israeli hospital, a Palestinian woman whose mother was whose son was being operated on, and she said they do it, but I don't care because this life doesn't matter. As her son is having his life saved, Yahya Sinwar had his brain tumor removed and then went ahead and ran Hamas and killed a bunch of people. So these are people who love death. So even if all of them stayed after Israel dropped leaflets and did knock bombs and made phone calls and sent text messages and did everything in their power to get everyone out of the way, went door to door instead of just decimating the place from the sky because of their air superiority, even if they all stayed and they all died and the numbers were astronomical, it still wouldn't be a genocide because intent matters. And that's the thing, is all of this stuff we're talking about also has to do with when you take words and you just make them mean something else. I'm going to use this word even though it doesn't apply here. And if I keep doing it, and if my reputable sources keep doing it, like the New York Times, like the United Nations, like Amnesty International, like Human Rights Watch, like all these garbage organizations that have been honeycombed with terrorists for years, when they all start saying these things, enough, the public who doesn't know any better thinks they do, and they all start running towards the lie.
Let's bring it back to as let's bring it back full circle. I love what you brought up, the last point you brought up, because it's something I was thinking about before the show. It's this, right? Look at the sources, right? So to the left, Dave Smith is a source to millions of people out there. And for people not familiar with Dave Smith, he's Joe Rogan's go-to guy on on Israel. Okay, he's Joe Rogan's go-to guy. He's a half-ass comedian that a year ago might have gotten 10,000 views on a video. Okay, might have gotten 10,000 views, and I'm not even sure they were 10,000 at that time, but Rogan elevated him, so I'm sure that probably caught up. But think about it like this: if you trust a guy like Dave Smith because he did Googling, he Googled, would you invest your money with the tax if you got into the back of an Uber and the guy said to you, yeah, I've been reading a lot about this company. I know I drive Uber and I'm good at it, but I've been spending the past year reading about this company. I think you should invest all your thought and money into this company. Everybody would get out of that Uber, maybe give him a little bit of the tip and say, guy was crazy. But when it comes to this, Dave Smith has been elevated, and we've elevated people uh, just so they could get a point across that agrees with their statements. And which brings us back to the White House messaging. The reason shows like this, in my opinion, are needed, where we talk about the news events of the day and we dissect them, is because that's how the news used to be. Okay. Some of my favorite shows growing up were shows like Crossfire, which Jon Stewart single-handedly killed, or the McLaughlin Group, or watching Fox News with the Beltway Boys, or all these people talking about news stories go on, and then breaking those news stories apart and really dissecting those news stories. We've lost that. So and I don't think a lot of people have the ability. Carolyn Levitt is a great White House spokesperson, but the skill that it takes to do what we're talking about, the White House really needs to outsource messaging, and they have not done it correctly. They have done an abysmal job of outsourcing stories. And I don't know what gets them to change. I don't know how they change it, but we're in a mess because they're not outsourcing the news stories correctly. They should have, listen, on the left, if something happens, every organization reports the same story. On the right, if something happens, there's 100 versions of the same story. Okay.
And it's verbatim. They're
Right.
all using the same phrases.
Right. So Golan, ending on this, how do we get the White House? How do we get the Republic? Forget about party. How do we get news stories to go out
Yeah.
from the White House, specifically today? We've discussed Comey. That is the story that should not end. Biden,
Right.
with her, a story that should not end. The fake story by the Washington Post, a story that should be called out and should not end. Israel Gaza, a story that should not end. Again, when there's 49 conflicts in the world and we're all discussing one, nobody's discussing the over 1 million people in the Ukraine-Russia war that have been killed, at
Right.
least that we know about.
I mean,
I'll tell you, my answer relates back. Sorry, man, but my answer relates back to the very first thing we were talking about, which is, who are we supposed to be listening to? Right. So it's great that there's a beautiful, intelligent, articulate spokesperson in the White House. And it's great that all these reporters look great in a suit jacket and can speak eloquently into a camera. The question remains, who should we be listening to? In my business, I always say there are three corners of a triangle. You get to choose two. It's good, fast, and cheap. It's good and fast, it's not going to be cheap. It's good and cheap, it's not going to be fast, and on, right? Here, there's only two sides. You are either experienced or you have credentials. Now, credentials, I think we've proven at this point that idea of degrees and titles and prestigious affiliations and all of that bullshit is more elitism than anything. You can sit in a classroom. I know plenty of people who went to law school and said until the first day they were in a courtroom, they didn't know how to practice law, because education is just education. So that's titles, that's credentials. Experience is the thing that we really need to have, that we should be listening to. When someone has actually seen something firsthand, when they have put their hands in the mud, in the dirt, and actually been there to handle it, when they have dealt with situations. As a producer, as a film producer, the first time I ever did it, I made mistake upon mistake upon mistake. I'm 2 decades more into my career, and now things just kind of happen on instinct because I had experience. Okay. And when I tried to go teach at NYU, they said I couldn't. Why? Because I didn't have a master's degree. Other universities, UCLA, USC, Pepperdine, I taught all over the place. They didn't care because I had experience. I had films that they were aware of, that they could see. I executed. It's the same thing here. Bottom line is that practical wisdom versus that elitism. Common sense isn't taught in a classroom, and we shouldn't be trusting what people have learned out of a book as opposed to in real life.
Well said. And Mendez, we're closing up shop. I'm morbidly embarrassed by stuff that is that the right word even? By stuff I've written 10 or 15 years ago. I look at it and I cringe to where I was, to where my thinking was at that time. The difference is I'm able to look at it and say, this is where I was. This is what's changed. These are the experiences that have happened since. And I'm embarrassed, but that's where I was at that time in my life. Humans evolve. I feel like there is a lack of evolution among many on the left, many on the right, to truly evolve. Even a day before, say, I was wrong. There's nothing wrong with saying I was wrong. The reasons I thought that were incorrect because that doesn't make money. It makes money to double down and triple down on bad advice, bad sourcing, and bad news, man.
Well, yes, you're right about that. Is that if you're a bright and curious individual, you will evolve, your ideas and views will evolve, but your core moral values shouldn't change, right? So if you see, this comes back to track record, which we talked about earlier, which was, you look at someone's track record, what to determine if they are a true expert. If you see someone that has been consistent against, let's say someone's against war consistently, and if they are out there talking about the actual genocide in Darfur and giving that probably the most airtime, and then proportionate to the amount of death and carnage or whatever, going down the list of every conflict out there, and then they talk about Israel as well, absolutely. do that, go for it, great. But if you're giving 90% of your attention to this one tiny little conflict and you're skewed in one way, bullshit. Period.
That's a perfect way to end it. Check yourself. Everybody check yourself. You're brilliant. I got to say that was absolutely a brilliant way to end. If 90% of your focus is on Israel and Gaza, if 90% of your focus is on Trump, if or 94% of your focus is on or 98%, if your focus is 94% on on a specific subject, check yourself. Like seriously check yourself, and maybe check yourself into an institution, because if 94% of your focus is on two things and there's no wiggle room, there's no touch of gray, you are not reporting the news. You are not giving, you are simply a, I don't know what the right word go on is, but you're simply
You're
not
just a
reporting.
mouthpiece. That's it.
Yeah, and you're simply somebody that's trying to make money, and you're and gain popularity and gain clicks. And I pray that that's where, I don't think that's anywhere we'll ever be, since, well, we're here. And on that note, I want to thank the people that downloaded the first episode. This is the second episode of the Daily Cheat Sheet. We're up on Spotify, we're up on Apple Podcasts, we'll be up all over, and just continue this journey with us and continue to watch us evolve, and we'll continue to watch you evolve. And I think that's the most important thing, is there's not enough premium on people evolving, and like Men said, keeping that moral, you could keep your moral center and evolve at the same time. And I think that scares people to death. Glad to know you guys, and I'm glad we did this today. I want to thank everybody for listening to the Daily Cheat Sheet. Thank you, everybody. How was that?
It was great.
Yeah, very good.
There's no